All right, the next histology video, we're going to move on to epithelial tissues. All right, so right down here, epithelial tissues, they are going to cover our body surfaces and line body cavities. So they're coverings and linings. And so whenever you see, like in this slide, you see like the tissue sort of ends, and you see this white space, whatever is covering or lining that area, like on the very end, and that's open to the external or internal environment, that is going to be your epithelium. All right, so it's going to be on the edges. Now, sometimes you'll also see what's called a lumen, which is like the inside of a tube or the inside of a hole. And so sometimes your epithelial's tissue is also going to be lining the inside of things like blood vessels and ducts. And so sometimes that can be in the middle of the slide, and then the blood vessels might even be filled with blood. So it can be sometimes harder to find. And we'll be going over some examples of that too. So I wanted to go over a little bit about the classification of epithelial tissues. And remember, usually they have three names. So the first one is going to be how many layers. So it's usually simple or stratified, and pseudostratified and transitional are other options. So simple if it's one layer, stratified if it's more than one layer, pseudostratified if it looks like more than one layer but it's actually just one, and then transitional for these sort of special cells that change shape. Stratified, as you can see, has multiple layers. And then so the next name is going to be based on the shape of the cells on the apical surface. So the apical surface is the surface, the blue surface here, the surface that's closest to the outer edge. Then the basal surface is going to be, the pink is the basement membrane. The basal surface is going to be the cells that are right next to the basal membrane, or if there's only one layer, it's going to be the bottom of those cells. That's the basal surface. And then the lateral surfaces are the ones that are in between the cells. And so we're going to always look at the apical layer, so this top layer, to determine the shape of the cell. And so if it is flat egg shaped like this, it's squamous. If it's sort of just as wide as it is tall, it's cuboidal. And if it's taller than it is wide, it's columnar. And sometimes you can also look at the shape of the nucleus for this, because the nucleus will be elongated, like wide in squamous. It'll be very round in cuboidal, and it'll be sort of tall and oval in columnar. So we're going to start with squamous cells first. All right, so squamous, the first one we'll look at is simple squamous epithelium. So simple squamous epithelium is going to be, sort of looks like fried egg. And I want to look at this one real quick. So this is looking at it like from the top down, if we were looking at the top. So we have the nucleus here, and then this is like the fried egg of the simple squamous. And this is going to be less, you won't see this as much, so we're looking sort of down on top of, like, let's say like the top of the skin. So instead of cutting through each cell, we're looking at the top of each cell. And so that's going to be why we say that they look like fried eggs, right? So this is like the yolk, and this is like the egg part that spreads around. So that's kind of or like cobblestone appearance here. And so this is going to be simple squamous epithelium sort of looking down on it. Now, if we are going to cut the simple squamous, so when we section the tissue and we cut through it, we're going to be cutting through it. And so if we sort of do a cross section and we cut through it right here, then these simple squamous cells are going to look very thin. And so this is an example. This is actually an example of the kidney tubules. And so this is like pretty cool. When we get to the kidney, you'll be able to see this. But so we're going to be looking at this simple squamous epithelium. And so look, we can see some white here. And this right here, this layer is simple squamous epithelial that's lining the inside of this renal corpuscle. So it's lining right here. And so we have the nucleus that's sort of long and flat, and it's just each one of these. You can see here's a nuclei, there's a nuclei of a simple squamous cell, there's a nuclei, and they're long and flat, and there's just one layer thick. So sometimes it can be hard to find them because they're so little and thin and hard to see. But try to look near an opening, but sometimes it's hard because if they're in the middle of a blood vessel, the blood vessel is often maybe filled with blood, and therefore it will be harder to see. All right, so here's another example of simple squamous epithelium, and this is going to be a cross-section of a bile duct that contains many blood vessels, and blood vessels are lined with simple squamous epithelium. And so we can see this is nice and empty, right? Mostly. We can see in here, you see a couple that have more blood cells in them, but this one is mostly empty. So there's some blood cells over here. You can see this is probably more simple squamous epithelium lining this blood vessel. But this blood vessel is mostly empty, so it's easier for you to identify that this is the lumen or the interior of a tube, right? And so this tube is lined with this simple squamous epithelium. So you can see these stretched out nuclei over here. Stretched out nuclei over here. They're just lining this inside of the capillaries, or of this blood vessel here. And so this is going to be important when we get to our cardiovascular system. We'll talk about the lining of the blood vessel. All right, and so these are two good examples of simple squamous epithelium. You can see that they're very thin and they line things. We also have some simple squamous epithelium in the lungs. And I don't have a view of that to look at right now, but these are probably going to be really good examples. So they line your blood vessels. They're going to be lining the kidney tubules, or the renal corpuscle here, and then they're also going to be lining the lungs. And we can see this here. This is like looking at it from top down, why we call them a fried egg appearance. So next we have stratified squamous. And we have a couple of different types of stratified squamous, but remember, stratified means there's multiple layers. And so this is a really good example. This is our first example of stratified squamous. So this is the basement membrane here. So this is where the epithelium starts, and underneath it is going to be connective tissue. So know that this is connective tissue underneath it. And we've got some dense regular connective tissue over here, maybe a little areolar in there, right? This is going to be, we've got some smooth muscle under there too. So this is going to be our epithelium. So it starts down here and it goes all the way up to here. So you can see that it is definitely more than one layer of cells. Now down here the cells look almost cuboidal, but when we get up to the apical surface up here, they look a lot thinner, right? So they're thinner, they're more elongated, and so we're going to call them squamous. And so we know that because we can see the nuclei all the way to the edge, we know that this is going to be non-keratinized epithelium. So this is stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium, and this is the esophagus. Here's another example of stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium. And this is going to be where it starts. This is the sort of the basement membrane down here. This is the basal layer, and then we go all the way up here, and this is going to be the apical surface. And you can see that there are nuclei all the way through, and this epithelium is living sort of all the way through. So this is non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Right, next we're going to be looking at some keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, and this is where we find in our skin. And remember, we have, or just so you know, we have two types of skin. We have thin skin, which is around most of your body, and then thick skin, which is on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. And so this part right here, this is thin skin, and you can see it is thinner than some of the others. So down here, this is going to be where our epithelium starts, over here, and then it's going to come up here. And you see how it's so flaky at the top here? This is going to be your epithelial cells have filled with keratin, and they have extruded their nucleus. We can't see any nuclei, and they've become really flaky. So this is going to be keratinized stratified squamous epithelium of the thin skin. So it's very thin. Whereas here is going to be keratinized stratified squamous epithelium of the thick skin, and we can see it's very thick. So here, this part is going to be the basement membrane down here, and then this is going to go up. The cells are still living at this bottom part up to here through the stratum granulosum, but then above here, this whole area here, the cells are filled with keratin, and they've extruded their nuclei, and so we cannot see the nuclei anymore, and they look kind of flaky, especially at the top areas. You can even see some little flaking through here. And so this is going to be very thick skin, right? And we've got keratinized stratified squamous epithelium and thick skin. Right, that's it for our squamous epithelium, and we'll come back to talk about the other shapes soon.